Welcome everyone back to AXA Insights. We have had the most wonderful response to our AXA Insights podcast, and this month is another special series that so many of us are talking about at the moment and wishing to engage with. It is the role of the middle leader, which is an essential one, and we take both the implementation of the role and the academic research to you this month. But first, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners from the lands and waterways from which we are meeting today. I am working, living and learning on Whadjuk Noongar land here in Perth, and I would like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and for their continued guidance, knowledge and support to the education of all Australians. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Michael Valentine here today, who is an experienced and uniquely innovative primary and middle school teacher. He has been the head of junior school and a head of middle school, where he developed engaging inquiry-based curriculums. His virtual learning program supporting boarding school student transitions was invaluable in terms of learning, but also well-being, as it enables students to form a connection to one another and the staff. With over a decade of experience designing and delivering online learning, Michael has connected students worldwide, including students from rural primary schools across WA. Michael knows the compelling benefits of inspiring collaboration and establishing a welcoming sense of community where teaching across distance. He is now part of a very exciting new programme at Scotch College here in Perth called Scotch Global, an inclusive programme that delivers online, giving the opportunities for students to come together in that safe and nurturing space. Welcome, Michael, to the programme.
Thank you, Anna. It's great to be here.
Getting started on this one. So the spectrum of roles in education is vast, and we often need to be that master of all trades. And I think that's often overlooked by other ones, maybe not in our profession. Now, I was so lucky because I got to see you in action many years ago when you were in a leadership position, but were connecting in that online space to many children across Western Australia. Now, what impressed me the most was your ability to draw those children in from so many experiences and your knowledge and understanding of the content, the curriculum, but also of how distance learning works. But this was a very embryonic stage of distance learning, and it was kind of really at the forefront because we hadn't actually had COVID at this stage. So you were already ahead of the game. What I noticed was you were constantly aware of that online space and the needs of each child, which we know is a real critical part of our AITSL standards. You looked at cues and you were intently kind of bringing it all together. But that really showed to me that you were an expert in the classroom and you brought that experience straight to this online space. Now, on your journey so far, what have been some of those highlights from teaching in that classroom space to moving into leadership?
I seem to have been on this journey, which coincided from the earliest days of technology in the classroom. To be honest, I found out that where I was working as head of the junior school and a key teacher of the Year 7 program, that the laptop one-to-one program at this school was going to commence in Year 8. And I heard that, sort of through the common room. So there was a meeting held very promptly. And of course, we had it started at Year 5, 6 and 7 in that school. It's such a critical point. Ever since, as a very young primary school teacher, I've been driven by the idea that an experience enhances understanding. So in whatever of particularly the core subjects we work in, I always, as head of school, not insisted, but we built up a team that agreed that having some sort of experience involved, hands-on, made for wonderful teaching and learning. Now, trying to do that in an interconnected world with students literally across the globe and in tiny little towns led me into another model, which, I don't know that it's mine, but we sort of were based on discussion, discovery and demonstration. So that helps. You've got to keep all the balls in the air when you've got kids online, and you've got to not go over the top with too many numbers. But discussion invariably meant me providing a whole lot of triggers that led the group on the screen down the pathway where I wanted them to go, see what they knew. Discovery was saying, this is the investigation I want you to undertake this week. So not when they're online, but I say, well, I want you to finish off. And I had agreements with the schools or their parents or whatever. And then next week we start with demonstration. So you have prepared a presentation for the others to see how your journey went. And some were catastrophes, some were utterly brilliant. And, and as soon as you open up the tools of technology, the learning or the failed learning or whatever it is amplified. And so we had wonderful video footage of everything from water density to ice baths and flames and burning tea bags, all of those sorts of things that were linked in rich history somehow. So I think, the critical point is it has to still be very, very good teaching, and it's really quite demanding, and you cannot teach well sitting down, and it's a simple basic, and you've got to be standing when you're doing online classes, and that's pretty much one of the major understandings as a teacher. One of the highlights was bringing it together. I'm not sure if it's the one you saw, but I had a class with a group of students in Moscow, a group of students in Munglanup, Lake Grace, Ireland, and Valencia in Spain, and one other little country town, Darken.
Yeah.
And I couldn't understand what was going on in Moscow because they're wonderful kids, and there was about 5 of them, and they kept looking at the particular lad in Lake Grace, and behind him was his lounge room window, which of course behind him was the farm and the sheep and the dogs. And he did a wonderful video presentation about his chooks to introduce himself. And then they politely asked me where on earth he was, and I explained it. And they then said, a little bit embarrassing, was he speaking English? And I said, yeah, he was, but he was speaking Lake Grace country kid English for 11 years of age. It was, there's all sorts of highlights. It's literally build it as you go, and it's been a remarkable journey.
And you really sort of hone in on some of the really key aspects, which I think is so beneficial to all elements of teaching, but that kind of also covering that cultural divide as well, of how other children and their pedagogies and their curriculums are led in different countries. We see that some children are more have been in a different kind of environment. But also you make that really good point of being that presence. Now I know, because I've met you in person, it's only, but being that presence for an online space, it really is a different skill, because you have to be in there. It's not like you can say, off you go to the children and we'll have silence while I'm doing something else. You are there and present for that whole entire period. And as you say, that's an intensity. That is something that you have to be aware of in that online space. And it is hard. It's a new skill for a teacher to sort of move into. Now, in terms of looking at middle leadership, so I was looking to find like that kind of core definition, we all like to hang on to.
Yep.
And it can be varied. We've got how it is interpreted. Now, I saw one that described it as an acting between a bridge between management, senior management, and the staff. Now, this did not resonate with me at all. I found it quite problematic and kind of a bit confronting, because it shows that disconnect between a leader and then the staff who are working, and this kind of, you needed this conduit. For you, how do you view middle leadership?
I think it's being 100% confident and knowledgeable about your space. So, unfortunately, my school leadership is very hierarchical, particularly in an independent. I think more so. I've only worked in those, but in an independent K-12 school, it is hierarchical. Someone famously said that leadership in schools, it's still a feudal system, that the kings own all the farms and know nothing about farming. And so when you have a senior executive, which has titles that are K-12, it's problematic. And so I don't want to, I never seek to create a toxic culture, but, and it is in some ways interpreting the school strategy and vision. I don't mistake yourself as a headmaster or principal status. Don't make that mistake, that you have the same responsibilities and status as the man or woman who runs the school. But you are a key member of the team in that particular part of the school, and teach. Always teach. Always teach, and not some sort of very modest 30-minute sort of step into a classroom, but teach and take control of something and demonstrate something. So I did that all along, and that I find that really critical. But building the team and then having a common language and narrative about it, use that language inside the
Yes.
school and outside the school as a team. And it's about getting the team to say, and it's not going to happen in your first term of a job, but it's actually begin to identify those people who are your champions, who understand either junior primary or middle school superbly, and then just do everything very, very well and differently.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I was reading an article the other day, and it was some help guide for head teachers to become CEOs. And I thought that was quite confronting, because I thought, but what the difficulty with that is, as you're saying, intrinsically, head teachers or middle leaders or whatever it is in leadership have been teachers, and they've been on the ground. And, as I said before, this vast skill set that they need to acquire as you're going up that system. Now, you've held many positions in various schools, and no doubt been very instrumental in the development of staff into those positions. What do you see as kind of the key skills and attributes that you would identify in, say, an individual to get them into a middle leadership position and support them in that role?
I think a willingness to learn and take on new ideas. I mean, that it's a bit glib, but it really is that, and to innovate, really innovate, and so, thinking of certain teachers, when I was head of junior school in grade 4 and 5. Just running with the protocol. So I devised a series. We devised a series of protocols that we agreed would be how our school would run, and one of them was no worksheets and no textbooks above grade 3, I think it was. And that was big to deal with.
Yes.
But the magic in a primary school is to see a teaching team. Now, a teaching team invariably around 4, 5, and what used to be 6, 7, sit together and say, right, what is the journey in humanities or English from 6 to 7? So let's design, these are the things we've got to achieve. Let's design some really out there with hands-on aspects to all of them that the kids are going to do across the 4 terms. So, getting buy-in is critical. So that's a critical leadership skill. And I would show all of my quirky English things that we would do. Everything from beetroot soup and setting fire to things and rotting ham and the lot. And then they would run. And then one of the guys who's now head of that junior school designed one of the most brilliant maths programs I'd ever seen, based on a show called My Restaurant Rules, I think. So I'm giving away my age, but well and truly. But it was mathematics and science and cooking. It was genius, and it was 10 weeks. But his name on it, and the boys in this case responded strongly. Parents loved it, but it was just brilliant teaching and learning, and that gets the whole team momentum. They all begin to sort of celebrate each other. It wasn't nirvana, but it was a very, very good school for a period of time.
Yes, and I think that's the sign of a good leader to me, is allowing the creativity of your team to come through. That's the kind of what we see, unfortunately, a lot of the time, is this kind of micromanagement of, here's a program, everyone, you've got to deliver it, and if you don't deliver it, that's why we haven't got results. There's kind of like that package. But a good leader has confidence in their staff to be able to have that, go, you've got this skill set. And as you're saying, that was a lovely part about the fact that once you've got that momentum, other people come on board. You can't introduce something and expect everybody to buy in on day one. There has to be that trust and relationship coming through. Yeah. So that sounds like a really good thing.
I met someone years ago called John Abbott, who was a former principal and wrote some fabulous papers that I still read. And I met him over at a conference in the East. And John spoke about his battles with the British government in just seeking to lift the standard of teaching. He had these series of brilliant anecdotes.
Yes.
But the best one was the letter back from the Minister for Education, who agreed with everything he said, which is along the lines of what we've been talking about, just brilliant teaching and all of that. He goes, I utterly agree with you, but there is simply no chance we will ever have enough teachers who teach like that. We can't risk it. And John, was furious and angry, and it led them, and it's leading us down the path of such a prescriptive, lockstep dullness, and where everything is so prescribed that the magical gets sucked out of it, because the art and craft and the science of teaching, particularly in primary school, is the richness of it. It's what we all think back in the day, and you had to do maths and you did English and science, and all of us know that we didn't cover all four of those at exactly the same, and that was part of the child's journey through that school, because your reputation was defined by how lively your class was, and everyone knew that, well, he's a bit nuts about English. He's a maths whiz in grade 5, and she is just a genius with science. So you get the journey, but that's not enough these days. But if time and space in a school that you get a chance to build, that's the sort of vision I think that needs to still remain.
And I think, we can always look at it from where's that sort of coming from. And I think, we see teacher training programs, and they vary quite differently as well. So there is that kind of, are we preparing our graduate teachers for that kind of environment? Where are we going? And what I also like the idea is, that kind of that you set the standard of what you want to achieve. So if you're a leader, show by example. And we have a lot of conversation in the media about this at the moment, that kind of, if you can show those qualities and attributes to children, you're going to support it. But if you as a leader can show those qualities and attributes to your staff, there is that kind of cohesion and that culture that you can have. And that would be a really good point, that, that support of leaders to do that is probably a key element as we move forward in that education. But so I don't know, my experience with middle leadership was that to get into middle leadership was perhaps the hardest part, that journey from being in the classroom to get into middle leadership. And then once you're in middle leadership, the step up to senior leadership wasn't as great because you'd learned a variety of new skills. But, as you adapt to these new skills, what do you think are most critical to establish once you're in that role? Where do you put your focus in that first part?
As a new leader, a middle leader in a primary school or a middle school, I went back to a program that as a young head of junior school, I very young, and I had a full 360 review, and as a result of that, I went and did a week at Henley in out of London at this course with these corporates and all. But it was about building the concept of a shared vision. And there were strategies around that, and I came back like really fired up, and the school was humming. But this enabled me there was a series of leadership skills, and that made sure that if you had a vision, it wasn't just going to be a hallucination. That it was actually something was going to happen, and don't do it yourself. Get your team together. So I started this with the whole junior school, and I would still do this tomorrow if I took up a job like that again, is to make sure that you work together and you have an authentic intention for what you want, that it's valid. It's not so much that it's achievable, but it's an authentic educational goal that is very high standard and it's well considered. Then you need to work around having an absolute time and space to give people a genuine effort to have a go at it. So you must have time and space, but the effort from everybody has got to be 100%, and it will go all different directions. And then ultimately, it's got to be the execution of that has got to be very, very strong. So when it came to certainly having a series of protocols in junior school for year 7, it was big and it was dangerous and educationally so. But we did it. We ended up with something that followed. Its tagline became, world class education. But we all knew how we were going to get there, and we did those steps, and all the way back to our intention, then our time and space and trial and error, and then our execution of it finally, and saying, right, this is what it's going to look like across 4 grade 7 classes. Interestingly, all will be different, but that means tick. So I think that's a really good approach. Always teach, and the obvious communication skills and listen, involve all are important.
Yeah, I love the way you picked up on the vision being world class. Okay, so we often use that quite in a flippant term. Oh, it's world class, whatever it is, but that can only be world class if you've actually gone out into the world and seen the standard. So very progressive in that sense that you were sent overseas to learn. And it's not that you're trying to replicate another system. It's the fact that you need to be in a space where you understand on that global sphere what's happening, good practice. And, I think we both probably big advocates for that connections, making those connections so that you think outside of the bubble of what environment you're in, and be willing and open to have those elements that you might bring in that you see as a benefit and that flexibility. So, yeah, that was a really good point. I think that I often see with schools, they don't look outside, and that can even happen on, say, the East Coast and the West Coast, but it is crucial in order to build that culture of world class, I guess.
100%. And it takes me back to a few conversations, but always be wary of any school that says, in a sense, I'm kicking myself here, but if it says we are world class, we are the best school on the planet, you probably need to get a move out of there, because I've heard that said in some of the places I've worked, and it's not, and meeting people in different countries. And as head of school, you do get that chance, and you just got to grab it. And you get like-minded people, and you meet some fabulous people who talk at the conferences you go to. And I still talk to those people today, and they still beam in and sit on my classes on occasion. And so it's so important. Yeah, it is really so important. And not losing sight of the core art is that you're not going to be a chief executive, most likely. You're going to be always a teacher. And you'll have leadership responsibilities, and that's gold. That people with that mindset deserve the recompense, and because they put their time and effort into that. But time and effort, good, but teaching skill and understanding's got to be part of the job description.
And that's interesting, I think, in what you're doing right now. You're in that space of bringing that distance together. So those skills of being connected on a bigger scale is so important. It's critical, really. Or else programs wouldn't work, and we've, I say that because you were at the forefront before COVID, but if anything was more in our face about that reality was COVID. And, we were kind of lucky in WA and West Australia because that was minimal disruption.
Yeah.
But, we suddenly got a wake-up call that could potentially happen. So we need to be ahead of the game, which was wonderful. And I think what you've done at Scotch Global is continue that environment. And we know that for a lot of children, we're talking at the moment so much about children who are unable to get into a school environment, that suffer from, anxiety and things that make a school environment quite difficult. Whereas you are sort of creating the conditions for children to thrive in an environment that is inclusive to them.
Yes, that's very much the foundation principles of what we're doing.
Yeah.
And you know what, Anna, it has evolved. 12 months ago, Scotch Global had 3 students in grade 7 with me. Today, we have 35 students, and we have 13 with me as head of middle school across years 6, 7 and 8, and the rest are in 9 and 10, and then in year 11 in the IBDP. Yeah. But what is perhaps the original vision, or my perception of the original vision, was offering a brand new option for students in the bush and in the regions and on the stations. Yes. We have a well represented by those. What surprised me, and perhaps it shouldn't have surprised me, are the number of students who literally are 2 kilometres from here who can't do school. And we now offer, so the 4 of us who teach the core subjects are specialist subjects teachers. Yes. We design the work, inquiry-based work. It's no worksheets, no textbooks, not surprisingly. And we thrive on this. It's literally build it as you go. It's a high wire act, but it's coming together, and we're offering these students the most efficient day. So whether it's Jane on a station way up, or Olivia on a station out of Newman, or it's Toby in Dalkeith, the day is incredibly efficient. It's 8 a.m. till 11 a.m. face-to-face, interconnected, 4 periods of classes, and really dynamic and conversational. Then we use sector and MyEds, where the afternoon work, we can see it being completed, but they find a time that suits them. So, Jack at Hayden, his dad says he's cheap labour. So, he hasn't done well at his primary school, and for whatever reason, they're not going to the district high. They're 40 k's out of Hayden. Yeah. So Jack then works on the farm with Dad, and that's Jack's endpoint. He wants to be on the farm the minute he's allowed to leave school. We get that. But now he has a 3-hour day. he's held to account for his work. He's he's getting some stuff done. He knocks off most of his independent work probably at 6 a.m. the morning before the session starts at 8, which is fine. But that's his day free after 11. And for kids who struggle at school, where mum's got to drop them off or dad at 8 a.m. and pick them up at 4, for these kids who are struggling, that's a nightmare.
Definitely. And I think the other point, when you're talking about those farm children who, farming is in their blood and that's what they want to do. And I've seen this example where you've got bright children who could be on that ATAR pathway or going to university, but really for them, it's getting through school to then go back on the farm. That journey for them does not really float their boat. They don't want to be there, and we kind of produce this system where we go, yes, but you're really smart and you need to do all these things, when actually we're not understanding the children's needs or what's very important to them. And utilize those skills. That's always going to be there, and sort of understanding what their pathway and their journey is to support them.
I've just written all the pastoral comments for the middle school students, and that's all in an interim report.
Yes.
And for some of these lads, that's exactly what I've said. I've said, it appears to me in recent years that Jack has failed to see the worth of school. And for Jack, he sees his life way over the horizon, and his dreams and hopes are, a big tractor and working on the farm. But I said, our job is to keep him connected and engaged and make this worthwhile for him, for the next 4 or so years where he has to be with us. He has to do school, and then free as a bird. But let's just get him engaged and understand this new routine and commit to getting some work done. It's important.
And that mindset is completely different. We can, we talk about things like curriculum, we can push and give knowledge and understanding. So this is what you've got to cover. But what you're focusing on there is that love of learning, that I've given you the skills to learn, and whatever context it is and what a place you work, context in the terms of this is what I want to do and learn from. So it's falling in love with that process. And just sort of leading on to my next question, you've obviously taught in many schools, and your recent work in the international baccalaureate space has been really exciting to follow. I know that's quite a new and quite a different thing that, you guys offer. But for many who then moving into leadership, middle leadership positions, they will often have to move schools to make that happen, or take on new school environments and take on new curriculum and pedagogies, which is quite tricky. But on top of that, we've sort of touched on this before, they've got to implement it with confidence to their team. What advice would you give to them as they move into this kind of unfamiliar space?
I don't want to sound glib again, but I think it is leadership through modelling.
Yes.
Why are you there? So why are you head of school? And first and foremost, it should be that you are a 10 out of 10 teacher, that you know your onions, you have a proven record, and that you are not just going to listen to them, but you're going to teach, and you're going to build together this vision that you work together as a team to do. I think that's a really important skill. Nothing beats confidence, as long as it's built on that sort of solid foundation. But building the new, in an environment as a middle leader, you are better to build it than just talk about it. So what you've got to do is build something that makes the old out of place. You come up with a model, that you come up with a program, you design something that has your name on it as the new leader, and you're not going to do it in a week, but you might get a good part of it done in the first year. And the evidence needs to be definitive, that says, this is why we're doing this. I know this is a change. I know it's a big change, but this is the reason why. And here's what we're seeing. So rather than doing that PowerPoint presentation in February, where the Kings are going to go, well, we've never done it like that before, and I can't see how that helps them write an essay from memory. That battle's won. Saying this is why we are doing this. Here's the student response. Here's what the teachers think, and we're going down this road. It takes a bit of confidence, and but along with that, authentic intention and time and space and execution, they're the winning points. There's no book. There are millions of books.
Yes,
to be honest. but there's not one that works, and it does take a bit of experience. And I'm perfectly honest. I was 34 and entered as a head of junior school, where and you sometimes find this, that the measure of the success of the professional standing of the team was how well they got on socially. That everyone's happy to work here.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
Teaching and learning is in the bin, so we actually have to forget about that
culture.
That social divide doesn't matter. It hurts a bit, but you've got to rise above that. But it is a good headmaster or principal, and lay it on the line with what you're going to do, by all means, or have a mentor that you really trust outside of the school.
I definitely agree. And I think that resonates with me, that presence, being there, and the listening part. We're often very, I think in many, we jump into things that this is what I need to do. These are my goals. This is what I need to get done. And we fail to put the groundwork in to know our staff, know what's going on. And, I'll happily admit that I've done those things where, in your frustration that not everybody's on board. And exactly what you said, for me, it was more, I had lots of schools in different locations. So going out there, meeting, listening, understanding the context made it much easier for me to build that, because people understood where I was coming from. I understood where they were coming from, rather than trying to rush through an implementation because that was the objective. So that presence and that, I suppose, as you're saying, connecting and understanding the dynamics is super important. But on a personal level, I suppose for you, it's sort of the final one I ask people, and I always kind of like it because it really gets them to reflect. But is there a teacher that, I suppose in your own education that you've resonated with and got you into that profession, or even maybe a leader in schools, or maybe a leader outside of our profession that has inspired you on your journey so far?
I think Bruce Dixon ran Expanding Learning Horizons and is retired now, but a distinguished Australian educator who led the very first introduction of one-to-one computers at MLC in Melbourne. And he and I connected when I was doing this at Hale in the mid-90s.
Yeah.
And Bruce was this globe-trotting sort of legend who gave enormous presentations and took enormous faith in me and dragged me along to these presentations, and I did conference after conference after conference at Expanding Learning Horizons. And he would set up little boutique weekend type professional development where he'd fly groups of us in, and Sarah and I, who was my other colleague, who I just believe is the finest teacher I've ever met back at Hale School. But Sarah and I both shared Bruce's passion for seeing technology, because technology was causing people like us enormous problems, because it was the efficiency of the machine seemed to just overshadowed everything else, and sort of the kings could see, my goodness me, a timetable does like this, and I can tell if a boy is searching another site, and just, oh my goodness, is this where we're at? And then Bruce, I don't think it was Bruce's line, but he spoke about, he said, too often we're just putting rockets on stagecoaches, and it always stuck with me. And Sarah and I just constantly spoke to Bruce. Read everything. That's how I met John Abbott, read all of his things, and it just kept driving us down the line. And Sarah was my deputy, very quickly became my deputy and right-hand man, far sort of smarter than me, and this breadth of knowledge, much younger. But everything, we just agreed on so much of what we were doing, and she could pitch it to the staff as well. And so the two of us became three, then became four, then became five. But I think Bruce Dixon was a real motivator.
And that's actually really ties in well. We've just done a series on AI, and Gary Steger, who worked with Seymour Papert on that sort of thing, and he'd come over to Melbourne, done that sort of stuff. And he talks about that AI being, he said, we've been through so many fads in education, and AI's got just sort of exploded as this new thing, and the dangers and the worries. And, he talks about that just being a crazy level, but similarly, everybody has it on their LinkedIn page as AI experts and all that sort of thing. But, that need to keep ahead, but also to have the trust in the students as well, that, they're going to be far more, they're all over it, really. and they're far ahead and changing that mindset of support rather than inform them on how to do something. Yes, that's a lovely.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, in a middle school and a primary school, if you're asking them to discuss, discover, demonstrate, AI is not an enormous help if the whole middle section is missing. If you're not actually undertaking that investigation, hands-on, designing, measuring, building, painting, blowing up, whatever, if it's not there to build your communication skills, AI, I think AI has real purpose. But yes, but as long as our fundamentals of teaching and learning are sharper, change your assessment. If AI, kids are cheating, that's glib in senior school, I know, but in middle and primary, change your assessment.
Yes, 100%. Well, that is a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, Michael, for joining us here today. I'm going to make sure that I put on our links on our socials, just kind of linked to your work and just the excellence, because I think this really is something that so many schools are probably in a space where they're ready to jump into, but the guidance and support, and as we've discussed in the podcast today, going outside your bubble and looking for people. And what you did bring up beautifully was the idea of having a mentor or somebody who can support you in that role. So I think that's incredibly important. So thank you to our listeners today. We do hope that you will engage with Michael and his work, and we look forward to hearing about your journeys along the way. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna.